Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your ever so reluctant prophet. I've written a love letter to my fellow Canadians. Just how deep does our rot go, I ask? How is the decay we are witnessing related to beliefs in a toxic ideology which is built on loathing individual liberty and economic freedoms? How much of this is due to a collective psychological immaturity where people refuse to take accountability for their own thoughts and feelings and actions? So, let us begin by examining the Canadian economy. I will begin with a micro view regarding the economic downturn we are in, but I certainly won't finish there. There are far too many signs of socio-economic decay. Since most will feel the results of tyranny in their pocketbooks first, I'll begin with that. But first, let me clarify the single greatest problem we face. We find ourselves in a place where the very meaning of words has been so corrupted that the precise use of language is no longer possible. We can thank our universities for this. Postmodern literary criticism has obliterated our ability to communicate clearly and concisely. We are funding our universities to indoctrinate our young. So we also need to ensure that courses are being taught based upon Western traditions and the legal system of common law. For instance, courses in Austrian economics and the importance of free markets would be useful in demonstrating the proper, prosperous foundation for our economic freedoms. Centrally planned economies are not representative of free market capitalism. I'll repeat that. Centrally planned economies are not free market capitalism. This lie has been employed by radicalized professors who want us to surrender yet more of our economic freedoms to greater state control. We need to remember that the government's primary obligation is to enforce the rule of law, to defend our borders, while protesting its citizens, rather than attempting to control the market, which is impossible, while printing money out of thin air, robbing us of the value of our savings. If you wish to design an economic system for failure, make economic progress the jurisdiction of the state and its bureaucracy. The reason we are in this economic downturn with a greatly devalued currency is the direct result of state intervention in an area that ought to be left to the private sector and private investors. One of the certainties of planned economies is that our elected representatives will be bribed by lobbyists. They will then use our taxes to fund their pet projects. Canada has had so many examples of this type of corruption that it is an indictment upon the Canadian body politic. Yet the blatant misuse of public funds has not yet resulted in the government falling or being criminally charged. I want a Canada with free markets, totally devoid of state interference, and I'm fairly certain that most of you wish this as well. Next subtitle: The Great Lie About the Left versus Right Divide. The left has taken fascism from the left-wing column and moved it to the right-wing column. Fascism was originally a phenomenon of the political left. It was explicitly socialist, hence the name Nazi or National Socialism. And it wasn't only Hitler who used this term. The Nazis had a platform of total state control over the banks, education, industry, the media, and healthcare. This is obviously a left-wing agenda. So clearly, it is factual to state that the Nazis and the fascists saw themselves as being on the left. Everyone recognized that these ideologies were a phenomenon of the left. However, after World War II, university professors from the left saw the starving, emaciated figures emerging from the concentration camps. Progressive intellectuals who dominated American academia realized that their own views were suspiciously close to those of Mussolini and not all that far from those of Hitler. They realized that they had to redefine fascism and Nazism to remove their association with these ideologies. So now you have the utter bizarre phenomenon where someone can walk up to Benjamin Netanyahu and call him a Nazi. My Norwegian wife often wanted to debate these topics back in Norway, but she found it utterly impossible. In Norway, there is a plethora of topics which are deemed to be sacrosanct and therefore untouchable. Since I spent 2.5 years living there, I know precisely what my wife was up against. An ideological machine based upon total social conformity. I watched her honest attempts to deal with the economic problems she was assigned by her government to address. So I heard her frustrations on a daily basis. First and foremost, in Norway, I saw a society whose belief in democratic socialism being embraced with such religious fervor that its collectivist mindset rejects and mislabels any who challenge their national zeitgeist. Obviously, I found it very off-putting, just as I do here in Canada today. Since I saw how their socialist system operates, I can assure my listeners and readers that there is nothing less democratic than the political system which Norwegians have the temerity to label as democratic. This is a subject I have mentioned so frequently that I fear belaboring my point. My wife was a senior advisor at the Norwegian Defense Department, Forsvarsdepartementet, where her efforts to reduce waste, cost, and variation were met with open hostility from her colleagues and bosses. Anna Siri, pointing out the failures of this dysfunctional system to serve the needs of the Norwegian public, demonstrated the following reality: that the beatings would continue until morale improved. Next subtitle: The Origin of the Left versus Right Political Divide. Revolutionary France. In revolutionary France, those who believed that the executive branch of government, as represented by the king, cannot be vetoed by Parliament, sat to the king's right, while those who believed that Parliament had the right to veto the king's arbitrary demands sat to the king's left. By this measure, all authoritarian forms of government are right-wing, while all of us who believe in limited representative government, left-wing. Therefore, conservatives who believe in limited government, according to this measure, sit on the left, while fascists, Nazis, postmodernists, democratic socialists, Marxists, postmodernists, and cultural Marxists, etc., are in principle all statist, authoritarian ideologies which share similar beliefs in centralized state control. Because of this, I am no longer willing to accept labels created by social collectivist radicals to obfuscate clarity and understanding. These labels were invented by authoritarians who loathe representative democracy. I refuse to use their language. I will not play their postmodern word game. Nevertheless, and I hate this, for the sake of mutual understanding and despite the term is technically incorrect, I am forced to refer to postmodernists and cultural Marxists as being on the left, even though they're not. On the necessity of personal accountability. What is the result when an entire society fails to individuate to become mature adults? Carl Jung's concept of individuation refers to the lifelong psychological process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche to become a whole, mature individual. When this process is neglected or blocked, especially on a large scale, it can have profound societal consequences. So what happens when individuation is absent? If many individuals fail to individuate, the result can be a collective psychological immaturity. Here's how it might manifest. Number one, emotional immaturity. People may remain dependent on external validation. Difficulty handling conflict, criticism, or ambiguity. Over-reliance on group identity, groupthink, or ideology instead of personal values. 2. Irresponsibility, avoidance of personal accountability, blaming others or systems for personal failures. Lack of initiative or resilience in facing life's challenges. 3. Shadow projection. Jung emphasized the shadow, the unconscious, repressed parts of ourselves. Without individuation, people will project their shadow onto others, leading to scapegoating, tribalism, and moral panic. 4. Mass conformity and herd mentality. People may follow trends, ideologies, or charismatic leaders without critical thought. This can lead to polarization, extremism, and even authoritarian movements. 5. Crisis of meaning. Without a developed inner life, individuals may feel empty or lost. This can lead to addiction, escapism, or nihilism. What are the social consequences of this? When this lack of individuation becomes widespread, it can resemble an epidemic of arrested development. That's precisely what we're seeing today. An epidemic of arrested development. Workplaces may be filled with reactive, unreflective behavior. Politics may become more emotionally charged and less rational. Education may focus on conformity over critical thinking. And culture may prioritize superficiality over depth. Jung warned that without individuation, society risks becoming a mass of unconscious individuals, vulnerable to manipulation and incapable of true progress. Connecting Carl Jung's concept of individuation to modern politics reveals some powerful insights into why political discourse today feels polarized, reactive, and emotionally charged. Individuation in Jungian psychology is the process by which a person becomes psychologically whole. Integrating our unconscious identity with unconscious aspects like the shadow, anima, animus, and archetypes leads to maturity, self-awareness, and personal accountability. How lack of individuation affects modern politics. Number 1, shadow projection and political tribalism. Jung warned that when individuals fail to confront their own shadow, they will project it onto others. In politics, this manifests as demonizing the other side, seeing opponents not as fellow citizens with different views, but as threats or villains. This fuels polarization, conspiracy thinking, and moral absolutism. 2. Mass psychology and herd mentality. Jung was deeply concerned about the dangers of mass movements. Without individuation, people may surrender personal judgment to groupthink, ideology, or charismatic leaders. This can lead to authoritarianism, ideological possession, and/or blind allegiance to political parties. 3. Emotional reactivity over rational discourse. Immature psyches are driven by emotion, not reflection. Political debates become performative and reactive, focused on outrage rather than on solutions. Social media amplifies this by rewarding emotional intensity over intellectual nuance. 4. Loss of personal responsibility. Jung emphasized personal responsibility as a key outcome of individuation. In its absence, people may externalize blame rather than engaging constructively. This fosters cynicism, disengagement, and radicalization. 5. Crisis of meaning and identity politics. Without individuation, people may seek through external labels of race, gender, nationality, ideology, rather than by inner development. While cultural identity is very important, over-identification can lead to fragmentation, where collective identity replaces personal growth. Jung saw this as a danger to both the individual and to society writ large. How individuation could transform politics. And this is what I'm advocating for. If more individuals engaged in the process of individuation, politics could shift toward debate based upon open dialogue, empathy over enmity, critical thinking over conformity to the preferred in-group, personal responsibility over projecting blame onto others, inner development over seeking external validations. So my next subtitle, how did we permit radicals to hijack our universities, since the academy is responsible for radicalizing several generations of young people at the taxpayers' expense? The first problem is that we have forgotten our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Here in the West, people have been foolish enough to reject the idea that Christ alone is king. They have made political idols their king and political ideologies their queen. Culturally, we have failed to recognize that Christian values, ethics, epistemology, and ontological thinking are foundational to maintaining a functional law-abiding society with justice and liberty for all. The second thing that we must understand is that most folks are simply not philosophers. That's why I attempt to explain complex ideas in the most simple terms I possibly can. Most have not studied the processes of thought which have resulted in 2 world wars, the Cold War, and the conflicts in the Gulf and the Middle East, and the Ukraine indeed. People were too busy keeping a roof over their heads, putting food on the table, and clothing themselves while trusting that their government had not been weaponized to attack the very constitutional democracy that they had elected them to defend. Many know little to nothing about Hegelian dialectics and the ideological possession of authoritarian regimes. Many simply cannot put themselves into the minds of others who hold radically different views. We falsely assume that everyone must be just like us, sharing our basic values of common decency. Well, my friends, there is nothing quite so uncommon as common decency. Thirdly, my generation up to the present are spoiled. We have been spoiled. I was spoiled. As a young adult, I had little concept of what it was like to live through the Great Depression, only to be sent off to war to defend mother country while ridding Europe from social collectivist tyranny. I simply cannot imagine how difficult my father's life must have been, even though he was fortunate enough to have possessed exceptional talents that resulted in his commanding officer keeping him out of the European theater of war. If he had been sent, I might not have been here to write this blog. Some of you might be glad if that had happened. Next subtitle: Ideological fallacies have resulted in creating endless conflicts and civil unrest. I'm feeling more than a bit frustrated, given all the ridiculous ideological fallacies which have captured our universities, governmental agencies, bureaucracies, and our dangerously ideologically addled political class. Since the martyrdom of Socratic debater and Christian apologist Charlie Kirk, I can see no peaceful solution to the species of ideological possession which has made itself fully manifest. Ideological insanity has now been born open for public scrutiny, yet too few care to investigate the nature of it and its complexities. Our universities have been weaponized to corrupt our youth. The Academy's endless spewing of neo-Marxist rhetoric is beyond the pale. We need to stop deceiving ourselves. We are at war with an ideological enemy. Since I call myself the reluctant prophet, I predict with reasonable certainty that this will not end well. These are things to think and pray about on this Friday, September the 19th. Leave your thoughts and comments. Make sure you subscribe, ring the bell, share my vlog and blog. Debate with me, I dare you. I hope that many of you will be willing to. God bless you all.